Good afternoon. Welcome to Grade 12 English First Additional Language. Today we continue with a series of lessons on Macbeth. We are doing Act 4, Scene 2 and a part of Scene 3 today. So please have your Macbeth book and your notes with you that you can follow and add notes as I'm explaining. It's a beautiful day to learn something new, so here we go. So we ended yesterday with Scene 1, where Macbeth made the decision to kill Macduff, Macduff's family. This act illustrates how evil Macbeth has become. So he ruthlessly kills innocent people without reason. Act 4, Scene 2. Lady Macduff is both angered and distressed by her husband's flight. She refuses to be persuaded by Ross that Macduff has acted nobly and wisely. Her young son uses his wit to challenge her statement that Macduff does not love his family. Their conversation is interrupted by a messenger who warns her to flee. However, escape is impossible and they are savagely murdered or slaughtered. This deed emphasizes Macbeth's tyrannical rule. It also marks the turning point in his career of terror. This leads to his downfall. Right, the setting is 5. It's Macduff's castle. Enter Lady Macduff, her son, and Ross. Now this is Macbeth's third crime of those described to us. It is purposeless and without any motivation. It marks the utter savagery into which he has deteriorated and destroys all sympathy that one might have had for him. But it makes the day of reckoning more certain. Now Lady Macduff questions what had he done to make him fly the land. So she is both angered and distressed by her husband's flight to England, and she refused to be convinced that he has acted nobly and wisely. Ross is trying to convince her. He asks her not to judge too soon, right? Because she believes her husband showed no patience. And then she says, but he had none. His flight was madness. When our actions do not, our fears do make us traitors. Macduff has done nothing treacherous, but his flight to England implies that he's plotting against Macbeth, and she believes that Macduff has betrayed both his country and her by fleeing from Scotland. And again, Ross tries and explain. He explains that she does not know if Macduff's flight to England was wise, based on his far-sightedness and not selfish fear or cowardice. We know that Macduff acted in the good interest of his country and thought she would be safe if she does not know the real reason for his flight. She suspects that he acted in self-interest and he deserted his family. Now Lady Macduff goes on. She says, wisdom to leave his wife, to leave his babes, his mansion and his titles. So how can that be wise, to leave his castle, all his possessions behind when he fled from Scotland? Right. And she says, he loves us not. He wants the natural touch. So he lacks the family affection and need to protect that are shared by all creatures in nature. And then she goes on, her young, the most diminutive of birds will fight her young ones in her nest against the owl. The mention of the word owl is important because an owl is mentioned before each of the 3 murders mentioned in the play. So Lady Macduff believes Macduff's fear was stronger than his love or his wisdom. He considered only his own safety and not that of his family. His flight was without good reason and is incomprehensible. She can't understand why he went. And then she uses a metaphor where she says, for the poor wren, the most diminutive of birds will fight her young ones in her nest against the owl. So she used the metaphor of the smallest bird that will always fight for and protect her young, disregarding her own safety. Now, the bird image is a symbol of Lady Macduff and her children's vulnerability, and it emphasized Macduff's irresponsibility. There's an emphasis on family, love, and caring, values that Macbeth seek to destroy. Macduff has been forced by circumstances to act in a way which makes him appear to be a traitor to his family. He believed she and the children would be safe if she does not know anything about his suspicions and plans. And the fact that he did leave his family behind in Scotland indicates that not even he realized how monstrously evil Macbeth has become. He never thought that Macbeth would stoop to the level of murdering women and children. Now Ross asks her to control herself, to be reasonable. He comes up for Macduff by saying he is honorable, wise and sensible. He has sound judgment and understands fully the uncertain times they live in. Ross says that people are being accused of being traitors without knowing that they are, so the accusation is unjustified. He adds that their fears cause them to believe rumors, and their fears are as unfounded and vague as the rumors. They are afraid all the time without knowing what is it they fear. Now, in his speech here, he uses a metaphor where he says, but float upon a wild and violent sea. Scotland, under Macbeth's rule, is like a wild and violent sea. It's destructive and unstable. And they are like shipwrecked sailors tossed on a stormy sea, not knowing what will become of them. So then he says, things at the worst will cease or climb upward to what they were before. My pretty cousin, blessing upon you. So Ross tries to comfort her by saying that the present evil circumstances will come to an end or improve. This is highly ironic considering what is about to happen to them. The murderers will soon wipe out Macduff's entire family. Lady Macduff just said, fathered he is, and yet he's fatherless. So here and in the lines to follow, we see a combination of tease, anxiety, and resentment. Lady Macduff bitterly comments that her son is an orphan, since his father has fled and left him behind. But Ross says, I'm so much a fool, should I stay longer? So he says he is going to leave before he starts crying and causes her even more discomfort or embarrassment. And in the last part, she addresses her son. She calls him Sarah, which means little fellow. It's a term of endearment here. It's usually a form of address when speaking to a servant. So she says, your father is dead, and what will you do now? How will you live? So Lady Macduff does not mean that Macduff has died literally, but that having left them, he is as good as dead. And she asks her son how he will survive without a father. An important note, Lady Macduff is the opposite of Lady Macbeth. She is warm, caring, tender, and loving. To her, family ties are most important. Macduff and his wife represent the qualities of honesty, loyalty, and domestic virtue. And then her son answers her very wisely, as birds do, mother. And this is a reference to Matthew 6 verse 26 that says, look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. And then she goes on and she says, with what? Worms and flies? So the bird imagery stresses or emphasizes the vulnerability of the Macduff family. That, linked with the innocence of the boy and the gentle teasing between them, make the murders even more horrific and evil. And the son answers, with what I get. I mean, so do they. And she says, poor bird, thou never fear the net, nor lime, the pitfall, nor the gin. Now those are all things intended to catch birds. She feels he's too young and innocent to realize what a dangerous place the world is. And he answers her, he says, why should I, mother? Poor birds, they are not set for. So traps are not set for the poor birds. No hunters would want him. And he goes on, my father is not dead for all you are saying. In spite of what you're saying, my father is not dead. And she says, yes, he is dead. How wilt you do for a father? She insists that as far as she's concerned, he is dead. She asks him how he will replace his father. And then instead of answering her question, the boy asks his mother how she plans to replace her husband. And then she mockingly remarks that she can buy herself 20 husbands at the market. Right, again, the son answers, he says, if husbands can be found so easily, they would be worthless and not worth keeping. Right, and then she says, thou speak with all thy wit, and yet it is faith with wit enough for free. So you talk like a child, but you are very smart for your age. And then he asked a very important question. Was my father a traitor, mother? Yes, that he was. And then he asked, what is a traitor? Why, it's one that swears and lies. Now the boy, which is a symbol of innocence, does not know what a traitor is. And she answers him, it is someone who takes an oath, make a promise, and breaks it. So Macduff has broken his marriage oath, his promise to her, by abandoning them, and has broken his oath to his king by fleeing. And then he just goes on, and be all traitors that do so. So everyone that swears and lies, are they all traitors? Everyone that does so is a traitor and must be hanged. And must all be hanged that swear and lie? And she just answers, everyone. And then he asks, who must hang them? Why, the honest men. And then he says, then the liars and swearers are fools, for there are liars and swearers enough to beat the honest men and hang up them. So the implication is that there are more villains than good, more bad people than good, honest people. They can easily overpower the good ones and hang them instead. Right, and then she just goes, now God help thee, poor monkey, etc. And then he says, if he were dead, you would weep for him. If you would not, it were a good sign that I should quickly have a new father. So, and then the boy shows his wit and intelligence. When his mother asks him again, what will he do for a father? He says that if his father were really dead, his mother would be weeping, which she's not. If he is dead and she does not weep, it would mean that she would soon have another man in her life, one who can serve as a father. Right, at that moment, a messenger enters and he starts with, bless you, fair dame, I am not to you known, you don't know me, though in your state of honor I am perfect. So he rushes in, he says that although she does not know him, he knows exactly who she is. She is the Thane's wife. And then he warns her, he fears that some awful danger is close by. And he says, if you can please take a plain and humble man's advice, go away from here with your little ones. Right, to fright you thus, methinks I am too savage. In frightening her, he thinks he's too cruel, but it would have been even worse if he did not warn her against the immediate danger. And then he goes on and he says, to do worse to you with foul cruelty, which is too nigh your person. Nigh means near. There's a double meaning. It's near in distance from the castle, and also the fact that she is the target of the attack. Heaven preserve you. And he leaves hurriedly as he's too afraid to stay any longer. Now immediately, Lady Macduff is deeply shocked and she wonders where she should go to avoid danger. And she reminds herself that in this corrupt world, harmful or evil acts are seen as praiseworthy. So she says, but I remember now, I'm in this earthly world where to do harm is often laudable, praiseworthy, while doing good is considered dangerous and foolish. To do good sometime accounted dangerous folly. And then she knows, although she's innocent of harming anyone, this will not protect her in the society they live in currently. So under Macbeth's rule, values have become twisted and inverted. We have here a perfect example of the reversal of values. Take note, Lady Macduff and her family are completely innocent. They have not threatened Macbeth in any way. So Macbeth's growing evil is seen in the fact that he even orders these murders, and also by the effect the murders have on him. With both the other murders, he is troubled by a guilty conscience, but neither before or after this horrible murder does he show any feelings of remorse. Right, the murderers enter, and the first one asks, "Where is your husband?" Macbeth once again makes use of hired murderers, like in the case of Banquo. They enter and ask where Macduff is, well knowing that he has fled to England. And then Lady Macbeth answers them. She remarks that hopefully he's not in a place so evil that he can be found by the devilish murderer. She's upset and frightened, but still shows her love for, pride in, and loyalty to her husband. The first murderer then says he is a traitor, and the son answers, "You lie, you long-haired dirty liar." So the boy dies defending the truth. So the first murderer, "What, you egg," while stabbing him. Egg, a term of contempt applied to a small person. It also suggests his youth and helplessness. And then he says, "Young fry of treachery, you're a child of a traitor." And then the little boy said, with his dying breath, the boy begs his mother to flee. She runs off, but is pursued by the murderers. So this scene stresses how much of a ruthless tyrant Macbeth has become. To kill defenseless women and children is a terrible cruelty and unforgivable. Macbeth has gone too far. Before he even murders Duncan, he is troubled by his guilty conscience. His guilt makes him see Banquo's ghost. Here, after this, there is no sign of any conscience or guilt. So Macbeth kills not out of political gain or to silence an enemy, but out of a desire to do harm. Act 4, Scene 3. This is the only scene set in England. Macduff's trustworthiness is tested in a variety of ways by a suspicious Malcolm. When Malcolm is satisfied that Macduff is not Macbeth's spy, he retracts all the vices he attributed to himself. He tells Macduff that King Edward has lent them an army of 10,000 English soldiers. With the assistance of these men and Seward, he plans to overthrow Macbeth. Ross enters with further news of Scotland's woes under Macbeth's rule. He eventually reports the slaughter of Macduff's family. Macduff's only consolation is his vow to avenge their deaths by being the one to kill Macbeth. So the purpose of this long scene is to give us a chance to get to know Malcolm a bit better. We are given insight into his outstanding qualities, his honor and integrity, his deep love for his country, his wisdom, maturity, and self-discipline. It can be divided into 3 parts. The first one, in England, Macduff tries to persuade Malcolm to return to Scotland and to overthrow Macbeth with the help of King Edward. Malcolm does not trust Macduff and tests his loyalty both on a personal level and to his country. We learn a great deal about Malcolm's great kingly qualities. The second part, an English doctor appears. We learn that the King of England, Edward the Confessor, has received the gift of healing and can cure people simply by touching them. And the third part, Ross arrives with the news of the massacre of Macduff's family. Macduff is grief-stricken and overcome by guilt. He swears to take revenge, to be the one who kills Macbeth. So the time is ripe to rid Scotland of Macbeth. Right, obviously, I said it's in England. It's before the King's Palace. Enter Malcolm and Macduff. We see the clear contrast here between the peacefulness of England under the God-anointed King Edward and the desperate state of Scotland under the usurper Macbeth, and then the wholesome moral values of the saintly King Edward with the loyal Macduff and the noble Malcolm versus Macbeth consorting with the witches, the agents of evil. Right, this is a discussion between Malcolm and Macduff, where Malcolm says, let us seek out some desolate shade and there weep our sad bosoms empty. So let's find a deserted and dark place to suit our feelings of loss and grief, and I will grieve with you. And then Macduff answers, no, I rather want to fight and defend my country. Right, and he goes on, he says, every day men are being murdered. Even the heaven echoes with their cries as it sympathizes with Scotland. And then Malcolm goes on and he says, what I believe I'll wail, what no believe and what I can redress. So he does not believe anything Macduff tells him. He says he will grieve things he is sure about and set right or rectify what he can at the right time. Now, very important here. In this lengthy exchange that follows, Malcolm is testing Macduff's loyalty to him. He is suspicious of Macduff. He is afraid that Macduff might be an agent of Macbeth who has been sent to lure him back to Scotland to have him killed, because that was a trick that Macbeth has tried before. So remember, the whole conversation that follows is a test where Malcolm is testing Macduff. Right, he promises here further to set things right once the time is right. And I will, what you have spoke, it may be so perchance, this tyrant whose sole name blisters our tongues. So he's talking about Macbeth, whose name alone now is despicable. He says, was once thought honest. He was once trusted and served loyally by Macduff. You have loved him well. And then he says, he hath not touched you yet. Now that is dramatic irony at its best. Malcolm says, Macbeth has not yet done anything bad to Macduff. Neither Malcolm nor Macduff knows at this stage that Macduff's entire family has already been murdered by at Macbeth's command. And then he goes on, he says, I am young. So he's still young and inexperienced. However, Macduff might earn a reward from Macbeth for handing him over, but something you may discern of him through me, and wisdom to offer up a weak, poor, innocent lamb to appease an angry God. So Malcolm is testing Macduff's loyalty by saying that he, Malcolm, is an innocent lamb that might be sacrificed to satisfy Macbeth, the angry god. He implies that Macduff might have been sent by Macbeth to lure him to his death. Malcolm's suspicions are unfounded and unjust. Macbeth's crimes have brought about a complete erosion of trust and love. And immediately Macduff says, I am not treacherous. He protests, I'm not a traitor. He says, but Macbeth is. He says, Macbeth is a traitor. And then he goes on, and good and virtuous nature may recoil in an imperial charge. So even a good and honorable man may give in under the pressure of a royal command and be prepared to do an evil deed because the king has ordered it. But I shall crave your pardon. He will beg Macduff's forgiveness if he is wrong. That which you are, my thoughts cannot transpose. He He says his suspicions or thoughts cannot change who Macduff really is, which might perhaps be completely honest. He does not want to make the same mistakes his father did, being misled by outward appearances. He says angels are bright still. So he recognized that not all angels, not all men are to be distrusted, but it is just difficult to recognize a good person. Appearances can be deceiving. And then he goes on and he says, though the brightest fell. So the brightest angel was Lucifer, and he became Satan. His brightness was deceptive. In the same way, Macbeth was once honest, but he chose evil. So Macbeth appeared innocent, but in reality turned out to be completely tyrannical and evil. Appearance versus reality. And then he goes on and he says, though all things foul would wear brows of grace, yet grace must still look so. Even though wicked things will try to look virtuous, virtue itself must remain unchanged, look virtuous. So although some people became treacherous, they are still the loyal and the honest one. And then Macduff answers, I have lost my hopes. He's downhearted, he's lost all hope of getting help against Macbeth, now that Malcolm doubts him too. Malcolm goes on, but he replies that perhaps that is the reason why he's suspicious of Macduff. He wants to know why Macduff left his wife and children unprotected, defenseless and helpless in a place he regarded as unsafe. His wife and children are tied to him with a strong bond of love and are therefore a very strong and precious motive for staying in Scotland and taking action there. If Macbeth were really his enemy, he would not have risked leaving his loved ones there. So it creates the impression that Macduff still trusts Macbeth. But Malcolm goes on, he says Macduff must not let his suspicions be an insult to him. It is merely a measure to ensure his own safety. He agrees that despite his suspicions, Macduff could be perfectly honorable and trustworthy. Macbeth is the direct reason for this mistrust. He has morally infected the country and made it totally impossible to distinguish between good and evil. Again, appearance versus reality. Now Macduff answers where he says, bleed, bleed, poor country, realizing the hopelessness of trying to prove his innocence to Malcolm. Macduff bewails the sad lot of his suffering. Bleeding country. The tyrannous rule of Macbeth can lay its foundations down firmly and enjoy the fruits of its wickedness. His title as tyrant is certain, guaranteed, because goodness, which is Malcolm, is too afraid to stop him. Afeard, where he says the title is afeard. Fare thee well, Lord. So afeard is a legal image, meaning it's confirmed. So Macduff is disillusioned and says that he would not be the villain Malcolm thinks he is, not even if he could gain the entire Scotland and the rich countries of the East as well. So he uses a clothing image where he says, for goodness dare not check thee, wear thou thy wrongs. Again, wearing clothing image. So Macbeth is secured in his borrowed robes of kingship. So we see now Malcolm is now satisfied that Macduff's personal motives are sincere. However, the testing continues because he wishes to test his loyalty to Scotland. Malcolm will now proceed and pretend to be completely unsuitable as a king to see how strongly Macduff feels about Scotland. He goes on, he says, be not offended. Again, Malcolm asked Macduff not to be offended by his suspicions. He says he has not spoken merely in fear of him. He agrees that their country is sinking beneath the burden of tyranny. He uses a metaphor. He compares the burden Scotland and its people have to face to a yoke placed on an ox that to force to perform the work its master demands. A yoke is a heavy piece of wood placed over the necks of oxen to control them. So if the yoke is too heavy, the animal will collapse. So Macbeth is the harsh and merciless tyrant, inflicting more wounds on the people of Scotland on a daily basis. We see an example of personification here, where Scotland is personified as a living creature that has to suffer severe physical abuse and is bleeding profusely from its wounds. Every day brings new wrongs and sufferings. It emphasizes the tragedy of the rule of a tyrannical leader like Macbeth. Now Malcolm continues here when he says that he is sure many people in Scotland will support him should he return to claim the throne. Remember, this is all part of the test. Moreover, the King of England has promised an army of many thousands of soldiers to help him overthrow Macbeth. Nevertheless, when he has killed Macbeth and carried his head on his sword, his country will be in an even worse position. It will suffer more and in more ways under the rule of Macbeth's successor, which is now Malcolm. And then Macduff is baffled. What do you mean? So bewildered, he asked who is to be Macbeth's successor. And Malcolm answers, it is myself. Right? So Malcolm here accuses himself of being evil to test Macduff's loyalty and patriotism. He says he knows his own nature, in which all the various forms of wickedness are so deeply implanted in him that when they are revealed, Macbeth will by comparison seem pure and innocent. He says, will seem as pure as snow. The unfortunate people of Scotland will regard Macbeth as a lamb when they experience Malcolm's endless evil. So, and then a badly shocked Macduff answers, not in the legions of horrid hell can come a devil more damned in evils to top Macbeth. So he says that not even the armies of hell can there be a devil worse than Macbeth. Now it is helpful to think of this scene that we've just read this far as a sort of a job interview. Because Malcolm begins by suggesting that Macduff may be prepared to betray him as a sacrifice to his previous leader Macbeth. And Macduff passed that test, or that part of the interview, by boldly announcing, I am not treacherous, I am not a traitor. All right? And then still Malcolm persists when he said, men may look as bright as angels on the outside, but still harbor secret feelings within. And then why, he asked, did Macduff desert his wife and children? At this point, Macduff nearly fails the test. He cannot believe that Malcolm is so short-sighted not to realize that his interests lie in defending not only his family, but the whole nation of Scotland. And then Malcolm's next move, with which he is busy now, is a daring piece of reverse psychology. He claims that as a future king, he himself will be even more malicious and barbaric than Macbeth. To understand this scene, the audience must at all times be aware from the start that Malcolm is lying when he suggests that he possesses no virtues, no nobility, no honor, and no qualities of kingship. Right, this is all we have time for today. We're going to continue tomorrow with Act 4, Scene 3, the rest of Scene 3. I hope you enjoyed this lesson as much as I did. Have a wonderful afternoon further. Stay safe, make wise choices. Goodbye.